Om Bhadram Karne Vishrunuyama Devaha Bhadram Pashye Makshabhirya Jatraha Sthirairangeis Tushtuvagum Sastanubihi Vyashema Devahitan Yadayuhu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, O gods, may we hear with our ears what is auspicious. O ye adorable ones, may we see with our eyes what is auspicious. May we sing praises to ye and enjoy with strong limbs and body the life allotted to us by the gods. Om, peace, peace, peace. The grace of Easter is a great silence, an immense tranquility, and a clean taste in your soul. It is the taste of heaven, but not the heaven of some wild exaltation. The Easter vision is not riot and drunkenness of spirit, but a discovery of order above all order, a discovery of God and of all things in Him. Set your minds on what is above, says Paul. This is an invitation to a way of perceiving life that colors everything. In other words, what Paul wants to express is to put our minds on the Christ. This world is all, with its all, inanimate beings and animate objects. Inanimate objects is nothing but the creation of our minds. When the activities of the mind cease, there is no world, there is no duality, there is only God. I experience myself as one with God, as an intimate union with God to the point of experiencing that I am identical with God. Really, somehow, one with God. Meister Eckhart. Happy Easter, everyone, and good morning. Welcome to Ramakrishna Monastery. And the topic today is the Tranquil Mind. Essential. It's very vast. I really try to, as I like to give you not just information, not just inspiration, but also some kind of plan for you to follow. Well, I had to summarize it. It's difficult to describe what the mind is in almost an hour. But let us try to arrive to some kind of conclusion. All we need is a tranquil mind. We talk so much about it. We blamed it for not giving us peace. We blamed it for not being able to rest. We talk about it when we can't think straight. We say, oh, my mind. And sometimes we take some Tylenol, thinking that it might help. I do. It is said, man is what he thinks. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 1.5.3, we find kamaha, desire, sankalpaha, resolution, vichikitsaha, doubt, shraddha, ashraddha, faith and want of faith, dhritir, adhritir, patience, impatience, hrir, dhir, modesty, intelligence, bhir, fear, iti, etat sarvam mana eva. All this is the mind only. Desire, lust, the tendency to believe, faith, the tendency not to believe, want of faith, doubt and knowledge, unity and diversity, agitation and peace, fear and courage, embarrassment and shamelessness, all the work of our mind. Desire, resolution, doubt, faith, want of faith, patience, impatience, steadiness, unsteadiness, shame, modesty, intelligence and fear. All these are simply forms of the mind. Whether you consider something to be high or low, painful or pleasurable, honorable and dishonorable, it is only due to our mind. Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho. As the mind, so the man. Bondage and liberation are in your own mind. In other words, if you feel bound, you are bound. If you feel liberated or free, you are free. The mind is the mystery of human life. It can be the garden of joy or the secret path to death. It can show us heaven or it can take us to hell. The mind tortures everyone, rich people and poor people, men and women, writers and scientists, politicians, businessmen, professors. The fact is that the person who is not troubled by his mind is very rare. Yet, the same mind that is the cause of suffering is also the means of attaining the highest happiness, the highest bliss. One who has truly understood the mind and has brought it under his control lives in bliss. One who has made his mind pure, strong, is able to accomplish anything. The mind is the cause of both happiness and unhappiness, both bondage and liberation. The mind is composed of thoughts and doubts. It constantly casts up dreams and fantasies, creating its own world and then destroying it. It builds thought castles in the air and then gets entangled in its own creation. In this way, it creates its own suffering and undergoes the consequences. Our mind. Some modern psychologists They believe that the mind can be satisfied by you letting it run free. What do you think? Should we? Then what happens? We have to bear the consequences. We all know it's never enough. If we let it run free, he will do whatever he wants. As you all know, in the Katha Upanishad and the Bhagavad Gita, the mind is like the reins that are being held by the intellect. The reins that hold the horses of the senses. If we don't, by the power of our intellect, get hold of the reins of the minds, it can take us anywhere. Heaven and hell, and mostly hell. So is it true, what some people believe, psychologists, that we just allow the mind to do whatever it wants? Let me tell you a story. Once there was a poor man. Wherever he went, poverty followed him. One day, in his wanderings, he found himself in the abode of celestial beings, where there is a heavenly garden, a paradise. There he sat down under a beautiful tree, which happened to be a wish-fulfilling tree. A fresh breeze was blowing, and he sat there. The man began to feel happy. What a beautiful garden, he thought. What a wonderful place I have come to. No matter where we go, our mind follows us. We can never leave it behind. And it never, ever leaves us alone. Even though this man was sitting in such a beautiful place, he could not sit quietly. Instead, he began to think, breathe this. If only I had a companion with me, how much more I would enjoy this place. This was a wish-fulfilling tree. So the moment he thought of a friend, a beautiful girl appeared in front of him. He greeted her with pleasure. Now, there were two of them, sitting under the wish-fulfilling tree. For a little while, the man was happy, but then, once again, the usual thing. He began to think. If only we had a beautiful house with 2 big bedrooms and luxurious furniture, he thought to himself. Immediately a beautiful palace appeared, filled with everything they could need. The man and his girlfriend walked inside. He thought, this is great. But now we need servants. We need a cook. I'm hungry. I could use some food. As soon as he thought this thought, some servants appeared and prepared a wonderful meal. They sat on the table, and the man and his girlfriend sat down. They set the table. The table was spread with delicious dishes. The man took a spoonful of food and was just about to taste it when he had another thought. And this is the nature of our minds. Always thinking and doubting. What's going on? He wondered. I thought of a girl, and the girl appeared. I thought of a house, and this palace materialized. I thought of all these dishes, and even they manifested. This must be the work of a demon. Immediately, a demon stood before him with his mouth wide open. Alas, he said, he's going to eat me up. The man cried, and guess what happened? The demon ate him up. This man was sitting under the wish-fulfilling tree. He could have thought anything, but instead, he thought of a demon. Too bad for him. Didn't last long. And we are all in the same predicament. Instead of thinking good thoughts, instead of thinking of ourselves as noble, sublime, we constantly think of ourselves as insignificant creatures. And thus we suffer the consequences. Thought has infinite power. It is our thought that creates our heaven and our hell. By our thoughts, we can make ourselves experience divinity, or we can put ourselves down, really, really down. Therefore, it is of the highest importance that we think positively about ourselves. And of course, if we want anything for ourselves, we have to give it to others. That's the law. We have to think of others as well. We are constantly eating the products of our thoughts. Therefore, if there is anything worth knowing in this world, it is our mind. Do you agree? What a mystery. But what is the mind, really? Mind is a finer body within this gross body. The physical body is, as it were, only an outer crust of the mind. Mind is the inner psychic package of a human being, the subtle complex of perception, cognition, judgment, and personal identification that determines the quality of an individual's life experience. Indian psychologists, the great sages who expounded yoga, understood that the mind takes 4 forms, each with a different function. Through the senses, it takes in information about ourselves, others, and the environment. You follow? It then relates that information to our previous experience, integrating it into our personal history and making it part of ourselves. It makes a judgment about the data received, and it ultimately deposits the experience, as it has all other experiences, in the vast storehouse of our unconscious. The basis of all the mind's functions is the process of cognition and thought. The mind, therefore, consists in a constant flow of thought. This is something we all experience as soon as we turn our attention within. When we lie down to sleep, we withdraw our senses from the outer world. We close our eyes and focus our attention inward. And when we do so, we become aware of the ceaseless flow of thoughts, fantasies, and images going through our minds. Is it true? All of us? And what happens when you have the inability to disengage? Sometimes it happens. You experience insomnia. Insomnia is nothing but the inability to disengage ourselves from this flow. And it is during short periods of sleeplessness that most people begin to realize the extent to which their minds are out of their control. And it's okay. It happens. It's absolutely natural. The mind and its functional aspect has 4 faculties, as I mentioned. One is manas. The second is buddhi, chitta, and ahamkara. Together, these 4 functions are called the antakarana, or inner psychic instrument. When the mind is filled with thoughts, we call it manas, the mind itself. Manas is that modification of the internal instrument which has a mechanical nature based on the patterns of our habits. It reacts without much thinking. When it makes decisions, that aspect of our antakarana is called buddhi, or intellect. Buddhi is that modification of the internal instrument which determines. When it contemplates, it's called chitta. Chitta is that modification of the inner instrument that remembers. When it takes the feeling of I-ness, it is called ahamkara, or ego. Ahamkara is that modification of the inner instrument which is characterized by self-consciousness. And we all experience this. In every external perception, these 4 functions of the mind are involved. These 4 functions follow one another so rapidly that they seem instantaneous. They mixed up so rapidly. We are familiar with the words, these words, the conscious and the unconscious. These indicate different planes on which the mind operates, conscious and unconscious. On the conscious plane, all work is normally accompanied by the feeling of egoism. I, me, for me, only. On the subconscious plane, the feeling of egoism is absent. There is still a higher plane on which the mind can work. It can go beyond relative consciousness, just as the subconscious is beneath consciousness. So there is another plane which is above relative consciousness, which is the superconscious plane. Here also the feeling of egoism is absent, but there is a vast difference between this and the subconscious plane. When the mind passes beyond the plane or relative consciousness, it enters into what we call samadhi, superconsciousness, absorption. The superconscious plane of the mind is the mind in its purest state. In a sense, it is then identical to our true nature. We call it the Atman. This is why Sri Ramakrishna says that which is pure mind is also pure buddhi. That again is pure Atman. The three planes of conscious, subconscious, and superconscious all belong to the same mind. Are you following? Hope it's not too much information. Try to take it in. Don't fall asleep. Later. The question of controlling the mind relates only to the conscious plane, where the mind is normally accompanied by the feeling of egoism. We cannot directly control the subconscious mind unless we are established in something we call yoga. Unless we make efforts to get hold of it. And the effort is all about being alert and gather concentration. To be established in yoga. The question of controlling the mind on the superconscious plane, of course, does not arise. But the superconscious plane can be reached only by those who have controlled their minds on the conscious and subconscious plane. Now, the perspective on the mind, according to this tradition, is based on the knowledge that there is something more powerful than the mind, something more powerful than the ego structure, something that is the witness, the consciousness that watches the mind. Mind is in all of us, whether we want to admit it or not. Is present right here. That knower is our true self, which Indian tradition calls it the Atman, the inner self, inner God. Essentially, man is not the mind, but the self, or Atman, which is ever free, infinite, and eternal. It is pure consciousness, and it's always with us, and is what we truly are, that witness who experiences the changes of our mind, the thinking process, all the thoughts that are passing through. That's good. See what happens? That's another state. In man, the free agent is not the mind, but the self, capital self. Mind is, as it were, an instrument in the self's hands through which the self apprehends and responds to the external world. This instrument with which the self comes in contact with the external world is itself constantly changing and vacillating. The instrument. When the vacillating instrument is made motionless, it can reflect the Atman. It can reflect who we are. All things exist in that knower. Peace, power, knowledge, enthusiasm, vigor, clarity, and boundless energy. Once we are in contact with the inner self, the knower, beyond the mind, we can easily gain control over our minds and hence over our lives. The perception of the witness, the inner self, is crucial to the growth process on reaching the highest. Are you down? You want to do it?
Yeah.
It's important that we are determined. And first thing first, we need to understand the workings of our mind. So let's try to dive deeper and deeper. More information for you. Oops, did you bring your notepads? There is no other way. Otherwise, I would just quote from the Upanishads and the Gita and just take that home. We need to make efforts to understand. The perception of the witness, the inner self, is crucial to the growth process on reaching the highest. To complete our journey means to come to know the self, which lies beyond all thoughts and desires. In short, the goal is, in case you didn't know, nothing less than the realization of our essential Godhood. I love it. If your mind is under your control, you can accomplish anything. Why is the mind considered so significant? It is said, because manas, the mind, manas, we are manava. We are humans. We have that aspect of the mind that is unique only in us, which is the intellect, a unique capacity that we have to discern, to determine, to inquire, to go deeper and deeper within us. Without it, without the manas, what are we?
Animals.
Nothing but gods. Sat, Chit, Ananda. Nama, Rupa, the mind. Name and form. Existence absolute. Awareness absolute. Knowledge absolute. Bliss absolute. Plus Nama and Rupa. Name and form. Without it, what are you? Pure consciousness. The scriptures and the the saints say that the individual soul is not separate. It's not a separate entity, but God, limited by our minds. It is completely pure and the embodiment of supreme bliss. Thinking that we are without God is like a fish thinking that it has never seen water. A fish would have no life without water. Water is the element in which it lives. We are in the same condition. Our life is in God. Are you strong enough to accept it? Because if you do, boom. In God, our breath moves in and out. It is in God who makes our senses. It is God who makes our senses function, and God who witnesses our very thoughts. God lives within us in the form of the inner self, the pure I awareness. Where are you? I am here. Are you aware of that? There you go. God lives within us in the form of the inner self, the pure I awareness that has been with us since we came into this world. Although people superimpose different notions into the I consciousness, notions like I am a man, I am a woman, I am clever, I am not that clever. I don't want to say a bad word. It is completely free. It remains completely free. The inner I, which is closer to us than our own breath, is divine. This is 100% hardcore Vedanta. You like it? I do. Why? Because he can make us free. We can be in charge of ourselves once we understand, once we accept it. The inner I, which is closer to us than our own breath, is divine. Yet people feel far from God. They think that they have not attained that God. Why? Because of self-delusion. That thought, that man under the wish-fulfilling tree, really, Swami? I'm not sure. I doubt it. All right. If you do, don't complain. The teachings of the Upanishads and all the saints is I am Atma Brahma. The inner self of a human being is God. There is no difference between self, capital Self, and God. But because of the mind, the self appears to be limited, or the limited enjoyer of our senses. Actually, the self does not experience anything. But through the mind, it mingles with the senses and takes on two aspects. You ready? Mingling with the senses of perception, it makes us feel that we are the experiencer, the bhakta. Mingling with the organs of actions, It makes us feel that we are the doer. I do. I enjoy. Thus, it is the mind that is responsible for our feelings of limited agency, our feeling of imperfection. We choose to be the enjoyer, we choose to be the doer. Guess who did that? But if the mind were to become pure, to discard all its thoughts and doubts, it would experience God everywhere. The mind, which is the cause of all suffering, would become our greatest friend. The Upanishads say that God immediately reveals himself to one whose mind has become pure. Now, is it true that our mind is impure? In reality, it is not. It's a dirty mirror. In fact, mental purity is not just to attain what we call liberation. If we want to lead a peaceful and efficient life, mental purity is necessary in every field of our lives. Because if the mind is impure, you cannot understand things correctly. You doubt. You're not sure. So it needs some kind of purification, so to say. And what is it? Focus. If a doctor's mind is impure, he cannot correctly diagnose. If his mind is strong and stable, he can even cure his patients through the power of his mind. The mind is often compared to a mirror. If a mirror is dirty, it cannot reflect objects clearly. In the same way, a mind that has become dirty by association with outer objects, identification, cannot reflect inner consciousness. Do you follow me? Do you agree? I hope so. But if it is cleaned by the practice of spiritual disciplines, we will be able to see the self reflected in it. God is very close to our mind, pulsating within the mind. The self makes the mind think. The self manifests in all our thoughts and feelings, and it is the self that allows us to perceive everything. Sweet, beautiful. It is said, that the self has two aspects. Prakasha, light, and vimarsha, understanding. Prakasha illuminates everything in this world. Illuminates everything in this world. Vimarsha understands that which is illumined. Through Prakasha, we are able to see an object. Through Vimarsha, we are able to identify it. Oh, it is a mask. Such a nice rest. I was told that many times, Swami. You put me in such a state. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get hold of your attention, The same self that knows the outer world is also the knower of our thoughts and feelings. Once King Janaka asked a great sage, Yajnavalkya, where can I find God? Yajnavalkya replied, God is the witness of the mind. Do you have a mind? When the mind is full of thoughts and doubts, the inner knower, Prakasha and Vimarsha, perceives and identifies them. No matter how bad or how good we feel, the knower remains detached from all thoughts and feelings. Whether you want to admit it or not, it's always detached. At night, we leave the waking state and enter into the state of sleep. But even when we go to sleep, the knower within us does not sleep, but remains awake and reports to us our dreams. That inner knower is the self, capital Self. It lives within the mind, yet remains different from it. The Upanishads say that the mind is nothing but the form, the body of the self. The Upanishads say that the mind is nothing but the form, the body of the self. It is subtle. The mind cannot recognize the self because it is its body. But when the outward flowing mind is turned inward, it merges in its source, and you immediately experience divinity. It happens to us. It's just we forgot. We are hypnotized. But it happens all the time. When the mind begins to reflect the inner consciousness, it takes on the attributes of consciousness. When the mind begins to reflect the inner consciousness, it takes the attributes of consciousness. Those who have read him, you know that he was one foot here, another foot somewhere else. He would talk and laugh, and all of a sudden, he would just merge in that consciousness. Exquisite. In fact, the mind that is alive, strong, and one-pointed, that has become one with the inner self, has the same power as the self. The mind becomes a clear mirror. For this reason, the Lord says, O Arjuna, do not become entangled in the creation of your mind. Bring your mind under your control. Make your mind very strong and make it move in me. Now, a little more information and I will give you a break. Let's talk about the vrittis. Now, in the second sutra of Patanjali, Yoga Sutras, he says, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is the stilling of the vrittis of the mind. Restraint of the mind stuff. If you control the mind, you have controlled everything. Then there is nothing in this world that can bind you. But he does not say that the purpose of yoga is to still the mind or to eradicate the mind. It can never be destroyed. It is not that the mind is not that the mind tortures us. We are tortured by the vrittis, the waves of thoughts, just like that man and the wish-fulfilling tree. It's not the mind, the vrittis, the waves of thoughts and feelings that cause the mind become agitated. It is this that must be stilled if we are to experience our true nature of self. Patanjali explains that the mind have 5 kinds of vrittis. Yes, I know. Relax. Try to take it in. Some are painful, and some are not that painful. The painful modifications arise from ignorance, unhappiness, turmoil, and the continual outward movement of the mind. The painful what? Thoughts, modifications. The non-painful modifications arise when the mind turns within and in meditation becomes one with the self. The vrittis of the mind are: number 1, right knowledge, Brahmana. Wrong knowledge, viparyaya, fantasy, vikalpa, sleep, nidra, and memory, smriti. The first kind is Brahmana, the thoughts. And this Brahmana, the right knowledge, has 3 subdivisions: Pratyaksha, Anumana, and Agama Brahmana. Pratyaksha Brahmana is the right knowledge that is received through direct perception. We all have this direct perception. It tastes good, doesn't taste that good. Pratyaksha Brahmana. If I see someone in front of me, I know from direct experience whether that person is a man or a woman. In the same way, when you turn inside and meditate for a long time, it is through direct perception only that you eventually realize the truth within. It's the same. Then you are confident of the existence of the truth because it is direct experience. Just like the ancient rishis or seers of the truth, they had this direct experience. The second kind of this right knowledge is called indirect knowledge, or Anumana Brahmana, in which one knows the truth by deduction or inference. For example, if you see a smoke on a mountainside, you infer that there must be fire there. Because you know from experience that if there is a smoke, there must be fire. In the same way, when we see light within during meditation, we infer that these are the lights of the inner worlds. The third kind of right knowledge is called Agama Brahmana. Agama means the scriptures. The knowledge derived from scriptural texts and from the testimony of great teachers. Jesus, his own experience. I and my Father are one. Now, we just described the first modification of the mind, which is the right knowledge. Now, the second modification of the mind is viparyaya vritti. Second kind of vritti, which is the worst. It's the wrong knowledge. Wrong knowledge is a false conception of something whose real form does not correspond to such a conception. The vritti that makes you believe that the self is a man or a woman. It makes a person who is going to live for a long time keep thinking, I'm going to die. It makes you doubt the one you love. In Vedanta, this kind of wrong knowledge is conveyed by the analogy of a person who sees a rope and screams, thinking it's a snake. The third type of vritti is called vikalpa vritti, imagination or fantasy. And these are all kind of thoughts that we all have. An image conjured up by words without any substance behind them is imagination. Imagination is a supporter of wrong knowledge. For example, if a person may be walking down a road and comes across a pillar, his imagination may say that the pillar is a thief and makes him feel afraid. I keep saying from the very beginning that God is within you. And your imagination says, how can God be within me, Swami, if I experience something else? This is also a type of imagination. The fourth modification or vritti is called nidra, sleep. Consists of ignorance or lack of knowledge of true reality. It is because of vritti, this particular vritti, nidra or sleep, that the great beings say, oh dears, wake up. You have been asleep for so long. This vritti does not operate during sleep state. There may be a person present whose eyes are wide open and who appears to be listening, hope it's not you, but who is not taking in what I'm saying right now. That's also a kind of a sleep. The fifth vritti or modification of the mind is memory. Memory is nothing but the impressions of the other four modifications which are not allowed to escape. Memory is the secretary of the other four vrittis. No matter where you are, it opens the file and shows you what took place in the past. So we are tortured, not by the mind, but by the five modifications of the mind. Do you see it? All afflictions are created by these modifications, not by the mind. As long as they do not become quiet, we act according to the feelings of the mind. We do everything according to our mental tendencies, samskaras, impressions, habits. And this is why we experience pain. Truly speaking, there is no suffering in God's creation. Suffering occurs only when we act according to the vrittis of our own mind. Why I tell you all this? Because we need to understand. Therefore, try to steal the modifications of the mind. The mind is the greatest God's gift. It is said, in this world or any other. Everything is attained through the mind. And it is true. In fact, the scriptures say that the individual exists because of the mind. You can assert your existence through that instrument. The question comes, how can I control the mind? Can it be controlled at all? The mind is not an object. It's not an object or a substance that can be brought under your thumb. Unfortunately, it's not. It's all powerful. Even if we try to repress it through meditation in yoga, it will carry us away. Many yogic disciplines treat the mind as the enemy and attempt to suppress and control it. A process that is futile, as trying to fight the wind. The mind is so strong for us to attack. The Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna, Lord says to Arjuna, Arjuna asked the Lord, Chanchalam himanah Krishna pramati balavadradam tasyaham niraham manye vayoriva sudushkaram. O Lord, says Arjuna, the mind is restless, fickle, turbulent, strong and obstinate. I think that it is as difficult to control as the wind. The Lord says, I don't have much time, all the creatures in this world arose from His mind. Therefore, the Upanishads say, worship the mind as a great deity. In the Gita again, the Lord says, among the 10 senses, I am the mind. I am the mind. Chapter number 10. I am the Samaveda among the Vedas. I am Indra among the celestial gods. Among the senses, I am the mind. Among the living beings, I am consciousness. The goal is nothing but the realization of our essential Godhood. The individual soul is not separate. It's not a separate entity, but one with God. Our life is in God. It is God who makes our senses function, and God who witnesses our very thoughts. Our life is in God. It is God who makes our senses function and God who witnesses our very thoughts. In describing his experiences, Meister Eckhart says, I experience myself as one with God, as an intimate union with God, to the point of experiencing that I am identical with God, really somehow one with God. God is closer to me than I am to myself, he says. God is pure beingness. But beyond that, and more exactly, God is pure understanding, intelligence. My intellect is the ground of my freedom. What is the intellect? It's an aspect of? Who has intellect? You. all of us. My intellect is the ground of my freedom and the seat of grace in me. My union with God then is primarily at the level of my understanding. I know Him, so I love Him. In India, all these scriptures, the Vedas, Upanishads, 18 Puranas, you name them, Smritis, 6 philosophical systems. These scriptures speak very little on how to attain God. They tell you straight away what it is. Instead, they are almost entirely devoted to describing means of purifying and stilling the vrittis of the mind. And you are all spiritual people. You practice at home, so you know these practices. Prayer, meditation, the repetition of the name of God. They all head towards what? Getting hold of your attention, your presence, concentration. If there is anything worth knowing as a means to know Him, it is our own mind. I've given you enough information today. The easiest way to tame our minds is to follow Sri Krishna's advice. To summarize, just take it. Embrace it. Remember Him all the time. Centering our attention in Him, we live in Him. Maya eva mana adatsva mai buddhim niveshaya. Maya eva mana adatsva mai buddhim niveshaya. Nivasishyasi maya eva ada urdhvam na samshaya. Fix your mind on me alone and surrender your intellect on me. Thereupon you will always live in me. Of this there is no doubt. Amen. Thank you. Well, as usual, I went a little beyond. What do you think?
Good.
Yes, okay, no. Do you guys have questions? This will be uploaded online, so you'll be able to watch it later. And take notes.
Yeah, sorry, wait for the microphone to so everyone can hear you.
Pranam Swamiji, very nice talk. I have a quick question on vrittis. You use the word nirodha, which means completely cut off. And then you use the word appeasing the vrittis. Because in the Gita, Sri Krishna said, Samantva yoga uchyate, means you can only balance the vrittis, you cannot remove the vrittis. What is your thoughts on that? Because
that's exactly what I mentioned. You need to understand the vrittis. We use the word suppress.
the nirodha means completely cut.
We use that word to give strength. you understand this and the functions of your mind, you remain as the witness. You give life to your vrittis. By depositing your attention and identifying with them. It's as water, the current of water. You are standing on a bridge and you see the water, the stream passing by. Now if you're gonna follow something, are you gonna be standing? You're gonna be there with a piece of log that is streaming together with the waters. You remain there. That's the secret. Yes?
Actually, because English is my second language, probably you answered that my question, but because I didn't.
That's okay.
Sometimes some words I didn't understand.
English is my second language too.
Okay.
So I don't know if that helps.
So to reach to the stage of super consciousness, what should I do as a spiritual person? Is it just yoga and meditation, or more than that?
That's very good. It's a good question, because after all, we talk about so big, but it's required because we need to understand and accept it. Now, you need to stand where you are right now and say, okay, what do I do? What is my situation? First of all, you have to find a place for your mind to sit and find tranquility, calmness. All these yoga exercises or disciplines aim to give you that tranquility, aim to give you that calmness that you need to lead a good life. So it is required for us that we practice. What do we have to practice, Swami? Concentration. What should I concentrate upon? You become what you concentrate your mind upon. What do you want to become? You want to limit yourself? You want to become the highest. So you meditate on God. That's why you follow Krishna's advice in the end. Just think of Him. Think of the idea that you yourself created upon that principle that we call God. Infuse life to that symbol of God. Know it's real. Become it.
Thank you so much.
That's the way to give the mind space where it can sit and rest, to think of the highest all the time. Then you'll be able to experience God in everything. And the deeper you go, then you get closer to Him. It was difficult for Him to say anything. It was all divine experience. But that's us, human beings. That's our right. Our dharma as human beings is to center our attention on the highest, so that we can manifest and be ourselves, our true selves, divine beings. And we are all brothers. Yesterday we were talking. We are all brothers and sisters. We should be able to see ourselves in each one of us. It's difficult. But hey, we have to try. Swami.
Okay, forgive me in advance for this question.
That's okay.
So when we experience these, for myself, glimpses of these higher states of no mind, you talked about that the observer of the mind doesn't experience good or bad, happy, sad, but some of those experiences are like bliss states. So is that experience, the bliss experiencing itself? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's also modification, because it's being filtered by the mind. There is a still ego there. But as the annihilation of the breath is, the more you dive deeper and deeper, you can go beyond that and merge, just like a wave merge in the ocean. There will be no more you to report, just like a salt doll wanted to measure the depths of the ocean. It jumped into it, never to return. Until then, that's why Sri Ramakrishna says, hey, it's smart to do this and somehow remain with some kind of sattvic maya or ego, so that we can enjoy the bliss of the divine. I like that. So that we can enjoy life.
Thank you.
Of course. All right, let's close. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, that outer world is Purna, full of divine consciousness. This inner world is also Purna, full of divine consciousness. From Purna come Purna. From fullness of divine consciousness, this world is manifested. Taking Purna from Purna, Purna indeed remains, because divine consciousness is non-dual and infinite. Om, peace, peace, peace.